Hey everybody, this is Emily Moyer and Michael Wan is with me. This is Project Kids number 10. This morning fell out a lot different than we planned. So we're we are down a Walter Russell rabbit hole, which is not what we had intended to do on this show, but what we're finding is interesting. So welcome to the show. Hi, Michael. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Happy almost Thanksgiving week holiday.
Yeah. Yeah.
57-year anniversary of
JFK.
the JFK story.
Yeah, and supposedly, according to dark journalists, and also, I mean, there is this weird video of this Conan Watnick guy that JFK's memorandum 57 has been enacted. So I don't know. We'll see.
So I don't know. This predates when you and I started conversing, but from probably January of 2020 through probably just about COVID, all I talked about was 57 because I moved into number
House
57.
Number. Yes, you
and so
did tell me about that. Yeah.
And so that has been a really interesting thing as it relates to that as well. And then here's one other thing I want to put in context before we return to Walter Russell is so the 22nd was the JFK assassination. On the 21st was the 400th anniversary of the Pilgrims arriving at Plymouth Rock.
Yeah, just the other day. Yeah.
So, and I'm just gonna, and maybe we'll go back to this, but I want to point this out, which needs to be two interesting things. One is it's virtually ignored because of the 419 project or the 1619 project. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So, but this is where it gets interesting, where this ties in. So the typical person doesn't know nothing, right? So then the typical person who knows their history just knows the history which we've been told. Like that doesn't necessarily mean you know anything. It just means that you know the history that we've been told. So the typical person who knows the story of the founding of America, they're like, the Plymouth Rock and the colony there, that was what began the United States. But the truth of the matter is, and if you're familiar with any of my work, and which I take the history which they tell us, and I think if I squeeze it hard enough, knowing that the history they tell us is all just like should be questioned immensely, but there's stuff in it. Jamestown. Yeah. Jamestown is the colony that is really where it all began. That's like that founded in 1607, not 1620, which is what the 400-year anniversary of what yesterday was. And so for whatever reason, there's been this interesting, like in the collective mind, the way the story has been told about the founding of America is that everyone knows Jamestown through Pocahontas, but they don't understand where, like if you were to ask someone like, well, what's Jamestown? You might get like, oh, I think it's Pocahontas, but they're not going to understand that predates the Pilgrims by 13 years. Now, if you ask anyone, like, where did it begin in the United States? They're gonna be like the Pilgrims, that's where it began, but that's not the case. So for some reason, and you can go and run with it for whatever, whether it's like competing timelines or if it's purposeful, like misconstruing of storylines and like that, for whatever, that has been part of the history. The fact that the 400th year anniversary of Plymouth has been completely like wiped off. Like this has probably been planned since the 350-year anniversary. Like, well, we're getting ready for the 400. Like they've been planning a big celebration, and now you can't celebrate because of this 1619. It's no longer politically correct to talk about it. So it has been wiped from the memory. So put that in context to everything which we're talking about, like, about the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, how consciousness creates reality, like, and the fact that it overlaps so perfectly with this 57 year anniversary of JFK. There's something weird in the area.
You also just said 400 years and a lot of the Tartarian information, as well as this, I'm not ready to say this is right or wrong, but my interest is very piqued by this FPV angel particle matrix research team and whatnot. They say that the system resets approximately every 400 years, right? So if there's going to be a slip, and then they lie to us about our history, right? They displace time and all that kind of stuff. So if this is going to be where a switcheroo takes place, right, it would be now just like it may have been then. A shift,
Yeah,
a
there.
50 kind of thing.
Well, let's go with the 400. So this runs with a lot of like the work which I've done when I first started talking about the Susquehanna. There is a secret the whole mystery with the Susquehanna River begins with the John Smith map of Virginia, which came out 1612. Francis Bacon, all this sort of stuff, but there's a secret code in there. At least I begin with that with a hypothesis, and that secret code is a location, and that location is the 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River. And so, because it's all tied with Francis Bacon, you know that you form it as a hypothesis, because that's what Francis Bacon, one of the things he's known for. Like the clues to deciphering it are built into the stories. Once you realize that, so like you go with that. So I went and I looked at exactly the 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River, like exactly, because there's technically 70 miles between parallels, and it's like broken up to degrees and minutes and so forth. But I started with the most exact 0 minutes, 0 or 40 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. And at that location is a park, and that park opened up exactly to the day 400 years is the establishment of Jamestown, and John Smith was the leader of Jamestown. You can see how this all connects. So then you go and you look at, so that got me hooked.
John Smith is also one of the characters in the Man in the High Castle.
Exactamundo. John Smith is also, like, you know how we use John Doe is a legalese term in the United States for like someone's name who is not to be released. Either you don't know it or it's like it's protected. It'd be like John Doe #1. In Britain, they use John Smith. And so John Smith has like many double entendres for like, it's a placeholder name.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about Francis Bacon, also Francis Bacon is he's the man who's accredited for creating modern English. So the transition from like Middle English to modern English that happened through the works of Francis Bacon, Shakespeare and the King James Bible. And he also played a huge role in the shaping of our modern legal system. Now, I can't say I know this for certain, but I'm suggesting that he's also the guy behind the name John Smith in the British legal system. But nonetheless, so I was going into all this sort of stuff, and 400, I'm like, 400 years, it doesn't take very long before you scratch the surface, and you're like, oh, within basic gematria, 400 means the end of a cycle.
Yeah.
In Hebrew gematria, like the final letter in the Hebrew alphabet is Tav. Aleph is the first, Tav is the last, and Tav has a value of 400. 400 is the end of the cycle. 400 breaths, 400 this, that, but 400 solar cycles is huge. And then we go and look at like the role of 400 within Rastafari, the role of 400 within the Bible. Like 400 is definitely a key like end of a cycle. And they're all lining up. So this is where I've seen from my research, we're going to loop back to this, is like the first cycle ended on 2007. Like that's supposedly when like the Jamestown cycle began. It started in 1607, the founding of Jamestown, and it concluded 400 years later to the day with the building, the opening of this park on the 40th parallel of the Susquehanna River. Same day, the bushes are like part of like the Jamestown celebration. This like was marked by the Virginia Tech massacre. All that stuff happened. Then you've got like the 2012 stuff, which is weird. Yeah. And now we've got this 2020, like this whole sort of time frame, like this window, there's something weird between like from the 07 to 012 and 012 to 2020. And we're seeing it marked mostly in the United States by the establishment of Jamestown and the establishment of what's it called? Plymouth Meeting or Plymouth Rock.
Okay.
And this is lining up with the JFK assassination and weird stuff.
Yeah, stuff is super weird. So we had kind of a different show plan for today, but I was talking to Michael before we started about Walter Russell, and this is going to be a little bit shorter today because Michael has to go to work and I was a little late because I had to drop my car off. So we were talking about Walter Russell because neither of us have ever looked very deeply into him. I was a little bit more familiar than Michael. So we started just looking at Walter Russell, and we already found some stuff to dig into. So we're going to kind of continue on with that here. And where do you want to go, Michael?
So the first thing I want to bring, well, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction of who and why Walter Russell is important?
Yeah. So, okay, my first introduction to Walter Russell was when Randy did a show years ago, like long before I was a co-host, when I was a fan of Off Planet Radio. He did a show with a gentleman named Matt Presti and a gentleman named Robert Otte, and they were working for the Walter Russell Foundation. This was the first time I'd heard of him, and they were basically talking about his sort of design for things, the way he saw sort of energy, earth, light, all of that kind of stuff. I knew a lot less then than I do now, but it all had that good resonance for me then. And obviously I know much more now. Walter Russell has been coming up a lot again in the last, I'd say, 8 months. I've seen him interviewed a lot. He's not Walter Russell, but Matt Presti's been interviewed a couple of times by Crow and a few other people. I think he was just interviewed by Christine Anderson, like after not being around much for the last several years, right? He'll make a video every once in a while, but he's been having, you know, a lot more, been on the rounds a lot more. And then when I started following this FPV angel kind of stuff, they refer constantly to Walter Russell and his design of his sort of machine as being like I'm still like, I actually think I'm going to talk to them today. So I want to make sure I'm understanding this clearly, but that the way that our realm sort of works is largely matches up to the design of Walter Russell's machine, and that light and water and stuff like that, and basically free energy, right? It's basically whatever's running this realm is basically like a large free energy kind of device or something like that, if I'm understanding. And it very much maps up to Walter Russell's graphics and designs and charts and whatnot, which there are plenty of tons of them available to look at. And so I was kind of explaining some of this to Michael because he wasn't familiar with Walter Russell. So we started looking and immediately just found some stuff to pop up. So that's kind of, Walter Russell had his own sort of cosmogony for what this earth is and for where we're at and what's going on. And he blended sort of spirituality and science in a way that was not permitted in his day, but that, you know, some people understood that later it would probably be really meaningful. And so his work has been republished multiple times over the years. And his famous book is called The Universal One, and he has another called The Secret of Light and one called A New Concept of the Universe. He has he has about 5 or 6 books. So yeah, anywho, doesn't sound like an old, like when you read his stuff, feels like stuff we talk about now, but it was written, you know, in the early 1900s. So
that whole time period has a lot of like, so it gets real kind of murky. Like this whole, like it falls underneath, I guess, the New Thought movement is what they call it. Okay. Which is like kind of the birthplace a lot of like new age stuff. And the whole area is murky for a variety of reasons. But there's an inherent truth. Like when you read through it, like something about this makes sense, but then there's a whole bunch of like directions where a lot of these original thoughts have gone from, or ideas from like the early 1900s really through like the 1960s and through that whole sort of like, you know, that inversion of the counterculture. But he is part of, at least from my opinion, a part of like that original introduction of these ideas into a lot of Western minds. What I got excited, so there are a couple things which I want to talk to you about, like which in our conversation right now. One has to do with resonance, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I want to go because what we do, and what I think is one, we're trying to understand it as it relates to ourselves. I think we're all in the same boat of like, we recognize some weird stuff's going on. We're trying to better understand how to navigate this time. And we're both recognizing that this idea of resonance plays into it. And resonance can mean a lot of different things, but it's a way of like, connecting with the thing you want to connect with to move through. So I want to go into like resonance. But one of the things which we do a lot in these conversations is we talk about our own personal stories, which is actually resonance. When you talk about your personal story as it relates to the greater story, you're looking for your resonance with that. So that being said, like with this Walter Russell, here are the two hits. So the first thing is, so Walter Russell, can I get screen share for a moment?
Yep.
All right.
There you go. You got it.
All right, let's go this thing right here. So we see Walter Russell and like later on in his life, I guess him and his then wife, Lau Russell, they found this, they discovered Swanoa. You know, it's what I like. I can't help, you know, this is the way I'm wired. Swanoa. You could see my name's like right in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
And you see
they hit it for you, Michael. You're encoded in there. There we go. I love it. Yes. This
so
is how
we
I
got
do it
that,
too.
but then we go look right here. This is where Swanoa is. Swanoa is right here in Virginia, and it's about 125 miles from Morgantown. It's like
yay! Okay.
So you see it? You see where we're going? So this is Swanoa. It's like right out. If anyone's here familiar with this, with Virginia geology or geography, it's like it's right by Charlottesville, kind of like the Shenandoah Mountains sort of area, which that in West Virginia is kind of like, when I say no man's land, there aren't many major population centers, which is usually a good indication that there's something there. Particularly if you're continuously seeing this part of Shenandoah area has a lot of really or is the headquarters for different like esoteric societies, different Buddhist societies. This is where the CIA, like where the farm is, where they do all of their training. This is where all the billionaires, like there is a higher concentration of billionaires living in this part of like Virginia. So it's like there's something there. They're all the clues. So and it's very close on the other side of the mountains is where you find yourself. So going back to resonance, like, you know, of course we're going to go and immediately kind of resonate with this Walter Russell. Like, I don't know much. And I'm excited for as you go deeper with the research into this organization, to find out how that taps in, because I think there's something there. But I want to give you that before I go into resonance. So let me stop for a moment and let you speak.
Okay, so I liked what you did. So first of all, that takes us right back to the same area that we've talked about so many times, where it's an area that Michael and I have sort of crossed paths in, that West Virginia, Maryland, Virginia area, kind of there, right? So Pennsylvania, like I'm seeing on that map, Pittsburgh, where I spent a lot of time. Also, I went to Charlottesville as a kid, and one of the things that I remember there are those caverns. They have those caverns with the stalactites and the stalagmites.
Luray Caverns.
Yeah. Right.
So Luray Caverns is actually closer to Waynesboro than Charlottesville. They're not in, I believe so. Let me go check, but go on. So keep talking.
We were staying in Charlottesville and we went and we did that. So there they have some very bizarre inner earth structures, right?
Oh, yes, they do.
Yeah, right. So we're like and what we're talking about here is a lot of activity underground that, you know, so to me, that's sort of evidence of it. And the fact that like, they'll show you that and say, oh, this is what it is, leads people to believe, well, that's the fantastic thing there. So they're not looking for something else, which may also be there. So it has all that stuff, right? But I'm looking at a couple of things here as we go down. So I'm going to screen share now. And
okay.
Let's see. So here we go. All right. So I didn't look at this. I was mostly looking at his images and his graphics and stuff like that before there. But we're come down here, and you hit this part with life with Russell at the Swanoa, but there was something, I was looking at this sort of Russell cosmogony, right? And what it says here is, in May 1921, Russell claimed to have experienced a transformational, revelatory event that he later described in a chapter called The Story of My Illumining in the 1950 edition of his home study course. During that period, I could perceive all motion and was newly aware of all things. Richard used the terminology of Richard Maurice Buck in his book, Cosmic Consciousness, to explain cosmic illumination. Later, he wrote, it will be remembered that no one who has ever had the experience of illumination has been able to explain it. I deem it my duty to the world to tell it. Russell's supposed knowledge gained in the light is the subject matter of this book, of his book, The Divine Iliad, published in 2 volumes. Okay, so I think that's like, he had some experience that led him off like deeply into this path of trying to describe this thing. Well, what's interesting for me is how he describes that sounds like exactly what happened to me when I started realizing I could see all this stuff on the back of my eyes, right? I could sense all motion, vibratory stuff. And a lot of the things that I have seen I started having the visions behind my eyes in about 2000, that 2006-7 period of time that you were talking about, 2007, that was when it started. Now, I don't know if it would have been there before if I had just closed my eyes, but I hadn't figured out to do it, right? But like I started closing my eyes when I was dancing. And a lot of the images that I was shown match up to a lot of the images that like are the graphics that Walter Russell uses, that are the graphics that these FPV angel people use, that I went desperately looking to see them again with my eyes open. And, you know, that's how I found mandalas and sacred geometry and all of this kind of stuff, right? But I was seeing that stuff behind my eyes before I knew what it was. I didn't know the term mandala. I didn't know the term sacred geometry. So I'm looking and searching to find again what I was seeing behind my eyes when I was dancing. Sort of like a very similar process that what he says. I had some sort of illuminating. And like that graphic that I shared with you earlier, I'll link to it or something with this show, or I'll put it as the cover for this show. Or I don't want to do that because that's their graphic. Never mind, I'm not going to do that. But whatever it is, that looks exactly like the stuff I was seeing very early on behind my eyes. It became much more complex as things went on. So that sort of, you know, this is, you know, he's talking about the secret of light. I have talked about things about the periodic chart, about like that some of these elements are represented in our stories as gods, and like some of the mythical and biblical stories are really like describing when 2 elements that shouldn't match up, like when there's a battle, right? Like these are 2 elements that shouldn't exist in the body at the same time or whatever, and they sort of go to war with each other and create all these effects, right? The body is sort of like a microcosm of like the universal system and whatnot. And when certain things clash up against each other, it creates problems. Others are more harmonious and work together. So he does a lot of work with that kind of thing. And what he's talking about, a new concept of the universe, unconditioned white magnetic light of mind, stuff like that. This all matches similar to this experience that I was having. And you mentioned 2007 is the time where there was this kind of weird shift. So maybe something shifted energetically here that was allowing me to sort of see and sense. And then when I look down here, I see that his early book in 1901 was called The Sea Children. Well, that takes us right back to John Lilly and Flipper and underwater breathing and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, yeah. Right, and we look at the titles of his books right here, right? Like, look at this. He's the same thing that you and I are doing right now. He was doing it then, right? Like, and his life had all that same stuff laid out. He's talking about atomic suicide. We were talking the other day, you and I, and we'll do a show that goes into this further later, but about the sort of psyop that is these radiation spills at these sites where there's all this funny stuff going on, right? 3 Mile Island, Susquehanna, Santa Susana Pass, Chatsworth. He's talking about atomic suicide right here. Like, I don't know what that book is, but it's funny that all these same ideas, he's got a home study course. We're doing our workshops and trying to kind of create our little way of studying this stuff. He's doing all this stuff in the early 1900s that you and I are talking about right now. So my guess would be that if we pay a lot of attention to the sort of stories and maps he's laid out for us, right, then we're gonna get, you know, we have some guidance to help us along our way here. So it's just, I've never really looked at this. So this is all resonating for me on a pretty high level. Just the language used to describe his work and what they talk about. And I love that your name, I mean, he has, right? Well, and also your name is encoded, right? The word sounds like Susquehanna, and it also sounds like Santa Susana, and your name is right there in the middle. Juan, and look, if you remove the S, it's Wananoa, like you want to know. Noah, right? I love that shit. Like, I love that you feel free to play with all this stuff like that too, because I don't need there to be proof of something for it to be true. But I mean, look at this.
So I want to, like, I love where you're going with that, and what we're playing with, and that's really, you know, what I think we're trying to do right here is realizing, like, there's a huge operation to hypnotize the masses of people into a certain way. And we're refusing to go that direction. And we're finding our way through it. And we're utilizing all of these different techniques to navigate this vast universe of information and like the physical world and all this sort of stuff. And what we both are recognizing, we're seeing it also coming out from this organization that you're researching as well, is like the role of resonance, of like matching up yourself to something else, so that then there can be a transformation of information, experience, I don't know, like whatever you want to do. And I think that has to do with, like we're talking about in the beginning, these like timelines, like, you know, part of telling the whole, like everyone is resonating with Plymouth is so that you are, or the history of Plymouth Rock, you're resonating with that timeline than maybe another timeline for whatever reason. I'm not saying there's a reason. I'm just recognizing techniques. So, these symbols that you're showing, and like what you see in the back of your eyes, I think like the more we play and we understand and they place these different sort of shapes over physical maps to understand what's happening on the map, I think that's a really powerful thing. But I also want to share what I've been doing this week. Can I do that?
Yes, please.
All right. Because we've been because this is a good story. So because it's all about resonance. This is where it's going. I'm going to, talk about like how we do this, because I think part of you and I were talking about this offline before we started recording, is this idea of resonating, of resonance with these things. Like it's a word, it's a concept that we can kind of grasp, but what it actually is, the skill of doing it is a little bit more difficult to understand. And maybe it's different for each person. Like, I think it's that complex, like how each person understands resonance with what they're trying to resonate with is unique to their own particular frequency, which is a reflection of how they go about life, whether that's really physical and they dance, or whether that's really intellectual with equations, or whether it's art. That's your frequency. That's how you know it. So that's why it's hard to explain, because what's true for one person is not true for the other person, but that it can point to it. So that being said, all right. So I've been making this friggin' Susquehanna map, right?
Yeah.
And so let me go and explain what I've been doing. So it's all about resonance. So I've been studying the Susquehanna River for a while. I've been doing like a lot of the stuff I do is on the starboard, and I created the starboard, and I do this artistic representation of the planets on here. And I've been wanting to do something new. I've been drawn to create something new. So I'm like, I'm going to create a map of this area, which I'm so familiar with, and I understand its the geographical markers, like this where the Herkimer diamonds are, and this where the anthracite is, and that's where 3 Mile Island is. And so I'm beginning to map out where the different energies are. And so what my thought has been is I'm going to create a work of art based upon this, which is going to resonate with this area. And I'm going to cast stones. Like, I'm not someone who's ever cast stones before. I'm like, but I'm going to cast stones, and I know I can tell a story, and by where they lie on the maps and what this is. So that's been like what has been driving me. And so this is how far I am right now with this. You could see like, this is what it is. It's kind of cool looking. And I know how to make it. Like, I know my own internal process. Like, I've never made anything like this before. I don't have any experience felting. Like, I've seen people do it. I'm like, oh, there's something I can do. I look for the easiest sort of path. Like, I don't want to learn nothing. I don't want to go and look at anything. I'm like, if I can't figure it out within my own imagination, I'm not going to go and do it. I'm going to wait till because I don't have enough time to go and learn. I want to do it now. So I'm going and I do this. I know how to do shit. And I think that's the truth for everyone. Like this, I do it with art, but you do it with whatever your thing is. So I'm figuring this out. And I'm not really certain how I'm going to go and work with this. I'm like, I know what I want to put on the map, but I'm not quite there yet. And then it occurred to me. I'm like, oh yeah. Remember the book, The Gaia Matrix?
Yep.
Okay.
Geometry of plate. Yep.
So the Gaia Matrix, they've got this one this one place right here, this map right here.
Yeah.
Like I get into ley lines as an idea, but I'm like, until you can like show me something I can measure, I'm a little bit suspect. But this book I love because it's like right in my own backyard, and they've got all of these ley lines right in the same place of the Susquehanna River. The guy doesn't talk at all about Susquehanna. He's coming from another perspective. And I'm like, I'm going to sew his ley lines onto my map. I'm going to overlay his ley lines onto my map. And that's going to add another layer to this casting of stones, which I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, and that's a little bit of trickery because you're looking at one map. And if you could see closely, like there's this rectangle in the middle.
Yeah.
That was my own drawing because that rectangle overlaps the area of my map. So I can see what I need to go and create. And it's kind of tricky and like it requires a whole lot of spatial ability, but I kind of like this. Is the challenge, which I find kind of fun. And I'm like, okay, all right. This is it. And each one of these ley lines is like, not only is it labeled, but the guy says why it's labeled and the energy of it. That's why I like this book so much, because I'm like, that's the truth. I can understand that based upon this history and this other stuff, which is on there. So I'm excited to do this. I've been thinking about it for a couple of days, and like the Saturday comes and like, this is the day I'm going to put my first ley line on this map. And to me, in my reality, I'm like, when I think about the art a lot, like how I'm going to create it. That's where I get a lot of joy out of it. Like I lie in bed and I think about it. And then the moment it goes from an idea to physical reality, that is the most the most important thing. Like that is in my life and how I work with reality, like that's the big bang. That's when it goes from this to that. That's a major transition, which I believe is in resonance to these machines you're talking about. Like when they do a change, like this is me with my machine. Like we each have our own machine. So I go and I'm like, okay, Saturday, I know this is where I'm going to do it. I draw where the line's going to be on the back with chart. I do all this with like a straight edge. I'm measuring it all out. And I'm about to do that. And Jenny has someone coming over to the house right around the same time. All right.
Yeah.
And it's a friend of hers, someone who I don't really know that well, but I have a connection to her. This woman who's coming over, she actually used to work. She was the assistant to my ex-wife. So there's a connection to that. And this woman's coming over and she's bringing over her new baby. Okay. Baby's like, I don't know, like 6 weeks old. And I've been talking a lot about this when I do like my one-on-one work with people. I'm like, there's something really, really significant to any child, like any child which is conceived during this time period we're in right now, who's born during this time. Like, there's the truth is in the pudding. Like that generation is part of this. And so like I hold that in my navigating of reality, that's real important. So like there's this child coming over. And so like, I'm thinking that's really like, I look at that as like an honor and like all these sort of things, like this new being being born in right now, it's coming into the house, all this sort of stuff. And then the child comes in and like I meet, and they're meeting right when I'm going to start doing my first sewing. And so I'm like, what's the child's name? They're like, oh, the child's name is River. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. So now I'm seeing like all of this resonance. It's resonating. So, okay. So everything is going, they go into another room. I'm going to go and do my thing. And so like a little bit of nuts and bolts. If you've never like sewn anything before, like particularly something like this, like when you've got a really long piece of thread, like I'm using this embroidery thread, like it gets really complex. And what gets complex about it is it's real easy to get knotted up because you're like pulling it through. And like, if you're not careful, it gets knotted up. And I don't have any experience doing it. And this is the longest piece of thread, which I've ever worked with before. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? Blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm getting kind of frustrated because it's hard to do, like just the physicality of it. It's a skill set. Like there's a reason why, quilts cost a lot of money because it's like a hard thing. And like, exactly as I begin, I'm going through this frustration, this baby river just starts, like, it's been totally, like, calm and sleeping, and it just starts crying and starts crying really, really hard. And I'm noticing we're in two different rooms and we're going, and like my frustration and this baby crying, like they started at the same time, and then they ended at the same time. As soon as I figured it out, the baby stops crying. I'm like, all right. And so I go along. It's real, like, time consuming. And as you could see, like, this is where it begins right here. I begin right here in the Finger Lakes. This is where I began. This is right at Seneca Falls for people. And I go all the way down here, and I go all the way to right here. And I'm about to cross the Susquehanna River in the first place. And the moment my needle hits the river, the baby loses its mind. It goes from totally silent to start screaming, like very, very, like in, like, like baby screams, not like anything like out of the ordinary of that. But there is this resonance, and that's like, and so like as we're playing with this, and I share this story because I just like to tell friggin' stories, but like also as, like, this really kind of fun way of, like, bringing in the mysticism of reality into the mundaneness of, like, I'm just so in this thing. But when you start paying attention as to, like, what's going on in your life, and you're beginning to see the patterns, and you're beginning to see your four-leaf clover, and you're beginning to see this, and you're beginning to, because everyone has their own thing. Like, that's the key to it. Everyone's got their own thing. They're beginning to create resonance. And when they're creating resonance with something deeper at this time, this is how we're navigating to, like, this, like, these machines, which you're going to be educating us about in a real short amount of time.
All right, couple of things. So I'm going to talk about this resonance in the way that I've been experiencing it over the weekend, because it sounds like we both had something different, but kind of like that. And then I think we'll just take a quick break and we'll go into the second segment. And I'm going to show you how the machines show exactly what you were talking about that moment when something goes from an idea into action, from where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I went to visit my mom yesterday. Like, we went up and visited her. I go visit her about once a month. She has dementia. So, we take her out and do stuff. And I don't know if she remembers it an hour later, but she seems to enjoy it while we're going. And there's this place we love to eat up there. Like, it's kind of like a craft beer place with amazing pizza and wings and stuff like that, right? So we go there quite a bit. And I have noticed way back about 3 years ago, when we first started going there, that the names of some of these craft beers would match topics that Randy and I had talked about in shows, right? And this has continued over time, right? So we go there yesterday, and again, same thing, like all of the names, like I'd say about 30 to 50% of the beers had something in their name that matched either something I talked about in a show, or something I talked about with Jeff, or something I talked about with you, right? Or something we talked about at Conspiracy Cocktail or whatever, right? That was still there. And so I was like, okay, it's like, to me, like, there's something about this place that, like, just feels in resonance for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always. And then while we're sitting there having lunch with my mom, my sister starts texting me my nephew's Christmas list, right? And my nephew's Christmas list basically consists of a variety of medium to very expensive Lego sets, right? Like, that's all I can choose from. But all of the Lego sets that he's chosen also match up to the topics that I have talked about in the last month, and the things that were on the board as the names of the beer. So these ideas are up, and they're being expressed a number of ways. Like, it's just impossible that, like, some evil cabal is controlling both my 6-year-old nephew's mind, the craft beer creator, and my mind, all in the same way, right? No, these ideas are up, and you'll see those presented, right, by the control system in certain ways, but, like, you're not really getting, these ideas are up, and they're wanting to be expressed, and not everybody knows the same information, but that energy, that resonance is up, and anybody who's tapped into it, anybody who's resonating with that same thing, is expressing it either through their craft beer that they make, their shows that they put out, the conversations they have, the toys that they want to play with, right? And none of these things are the main thing that's being pushed by the media. These are all kind of things that we're all talking about right now, but that aren't the mainstream or even the sub-mainstream stuff. So I thought it was amazing. My nephews even tapped into it, right? But so I kind of had it's a different version of what you were talking about with this baby. To this day, I can predict when I go to this place that there's going to be a resonance. There always is at least a few beers that are matching up to stuff. But then this is the first time this has happened with my nephew, where he chimes in like that, right? And I thought that was so interesting because you were talking about a baby. So these
right.
Like these kids are picking up on this, and obviously, he's having a different experience, than he used to. He was locked in his house for a number of months, and while he's back at school now, it's a different experience. And so he's not distracted with certain other kinds of things. And so he's tapping into something different, right? Like it's very interesting. So I thought that, and the name of this place, I don't know if I want to say, because I don't know if I want to like break. Maybe I'll keep it secret. I'll take you there when you come. But
definitely.
Yeah, but it's fascinating to me the way that just happened, and it all happened in the same hour. Like she texted while we were there, right, with this list, right? And of course, one of the items on the list is something we're talking about today. He wanted like the under ocean exploration base Lego set, right? It's going to explore like the ocean floor. And here we're talking about the sea children, and we've been talking about John Lilly and da-da. And the other ones were different things, but the other ones, one of his sets has something about a green dragon, and that's part of your work, right? Like the green dragon and whatnot, right? So it wasn't just, it's fascinating to me how this was, popping up and about, but I like that. And it has to do with things that we're working on, not just things we're talking about, but we've done research into these things, and you're creating some art about some of this stuff and whatnot, and then this kind of comes together, and like something is up, right? Like something is highly up that creates
something's up.
Something's up, dude.
Without a doubt. And I think you're right. And almost like the more things that you can touch with it, like, like research is mental. Like the art is like creative. So like one is mental, rational, one like art, any sort of things like that is mental as well, because you got to think through it for the most part. I mean, I guess there's some expressions which are a little bit more like just completely like unconscious. But that's a different part of how you're touching it. And then physically when you're doing something. So as all of these different things, which we're talking about, yes, there's something going on. And
I have a question just popping to my mind, because we were talking about this one at Conspiracy Cocktail. When you were researching the Green Dragon Tavern.
Yes.
Right? Did absinthe come up in your research at all?
I don't recall that, but I mean, I can see like the obvious connotation.
Right, because it's known as the Green Fairy, but some people also refer to it as the Green Dragon. Somehow, based on something Jeff was talking about, we ended up at the Green Dragon Tavern at Conspiracy Cocktail and looking into some stuff and all this green sort of glass artifacts that they have, like related to that kind of thing. But we got into this topic about absinthe because we were thinking maybe, we were talking about that movie Predestination, right? And we were trying to figure out what the bottle they were drinking was. And it came up, we couldn't really figure it out, but one of the ideas that came forth was that they were drinking absinthe. And absinthe is very different than a lot of other liquors. In fact, it was illegal for a number of years, and actually brought back into style or trend by Marilyn Manson, lives in Chatsworth near the Manson Tunnel, right? But the other name for absinthe is wormwood. Like we've always heard a lot about Nibiru and all this, that's another name for it, is wormwood. The other thing wormwood does is like chase parasites out of the body, right? And all the other liquors are thought of as like spirits, but absinthe actually chases some of that kind of stuff away, right? So drinking absinthe is kind of a different experience than drinking almost any of the other liquors, both in terms of like the mental state, because it's got some hallucination properties to it, right? Especially like if you got wormwood in your stuff, but it has a different effect just on the body in terms of what it does. And I'm just curious, I just was curious if you came across any of that sort of stuff.
So no, but when you said that it made me think of something immediately. The way you described it, and you're more or less describing, so like looking at it more so in terms of resonance, resonance is like just things that are like similar, it's recognized. It's what you and I do. We're looking at like name places when they're the same. There's a resonance, and there's all these different ways of being resonance. But in terms of a lot of its attributes, how you just described absinthe, and we could go down the Green Dragon, and like I wanted to talk about the musical Hamilton, because this is tying into a lot of that as well. But the way you just described absinthe, thank you, is more or less how you describe ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Because ayahuasca, there's a lot of the ayahuasca is primarily a parasite. It cleans out the system. So that was one of the first things. And you think about like with the hallucinatory experiences as it ties into that.
Ayahuasca also has so like I think it's the thing that's the vine.
Yes.
In ayahuasca is an anti-parasite. And when people think that they're seeing all these dragons in their ayahuasca thing, they're actually watching the parasites leave their body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so then let's go one step further and then look at like, part of like understanding this time frame which we're in has to do with understanding like energetic and spiritual parasites.
Yeah.
And I say like a parasite is a friggin' parasite. So your physical parasites or your emotional parasites or your spiritual parasites. So the fact that you're going to bring that up, I think is kind of interesting. Like, I've often thought about it like, and you think about the transformative qualities, but also like the potentially psychotic qualities that go along with both of those substances as well.
Yeah. Have you ever had absinthe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So but I never had it was never like I never had it and had any like unusual
for a long
experience.
time, the absinthe that they were using wasn't real absinthe because it was illegal.
That's what I was told.
Yeah.
So I don't think I never had anything which struck me as unusual.
Now you can get both, like you can get the kind of more fake stuff and the real stuff, right? They all sort of taste like anise or licorice or whatever, but some of them have real wormwood in it and some of them have high content of real wormwood in it so that there would be closer to a hallucinatory effect. But one of the things that they've always used absinthe with is sugar, right? They drip it over the sugar cube. Have you ever seen that? Right. So that matches up also to the turpentine method of removing parasites and candida and things like that from the body, where they drop turpentine on sugar cube, you eat the sugar cube, all the parasites come for the sugar and they get fucking zapped. Right. So like, it's an alchemical process that people were going through with absinthe. You can also like, there's several cocktails you can make with it. You can drink it straight and whatnot. But I think the stuff that they were drinking back in the day was a lot stronger than what generally people have experienced in modern times. I'm sure that there is someone making the more original sort of concoction or brew or whatever, and that may have some of that. But also the vibration or the frequency of that time may have been different than what it is right now. So it would be a different substance that could take you to some of those levels than it is now. Right. But yeah, I don't know why that just kind of came forward and I wanted to ask you about that. Let's do that. Let's wrap this segment real fast and then we'll move over to the patron section. And I want to show you this stuff with the charts and then we can go to where you wanted to go with what you just said you wanted to talk about. You just said you wanted to go into we'll go where we go. All right, guys.
We go where we go. All right.
If you want to hear the next segment, join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia. Also, start looking in a few weeks from now. Like Michael and I are working on an interesting live streaming research project that we hope to be bringing forward. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Because Michael and I could do this all day. And the problem is we can't have enough phone calls or meetings or shows to get all these ideas that we talk about and all this cross research that we do. So we're just going to start live streaming our research, it looks like. So keep your eyes out for that. Find Michael at susquehannaalchemy.com. You know where to find me. We'll see you in just a few minutes. All righty.